So this is a video response to Little Dragon of Little Dragon's Productions, or Dragon's Foot Productions, I think, actually. And he does a really good channel. It's also a really small channel, so you should definitely check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. And he recently, I think maybe around 2 weeks ago, did a video about the cast blow and that whole dialogue that's been going on between, first Thane Thran, who sort of came up with or found the technique, depending on your perspective. Either he made it or rediscovered this lost technique. And ever since then, there's been all sorts of different people in the community, myself included, who have made responses to that and just had this conversation. And Little Dragon is just the most recent one to come into this conversation. So I thought I would respond to his video since he mentions me in his. And one of the things he talked about is with momentum. So in my original video I said I didn't like the cast blow because it means you have a lot of momentum that's harder to redirect once you do the cast blow. So if you do the cast blow and then come back, it's going to take a lot more time and just be a bit more annoying than returning to that position from a non-cast blow. And he talks about how you don't return to that ready position after every stroke. And yes, that's true. You will generally do, like 2 or 3 strokes before you get into a ready position. Maybe you'll do a stroke and do something with your shield. But at some point, if you're out of that ready position for too long, it'll start, wearing you out faster. You won't be able to defend yourself quite as much because you'll be, overextended. And so at some point, you will return to that ready position, as even he says. You don't want to keep doing attacks over and over again except for so long. So yes, when I was doing it, I was demonstrating, after every stroke, but it's just for, demonstration purposes. Even if, you do a cast blow and then you strike back, as long as you're doing, anytime you will return to a ready position after a cast blow, you're going to have that problem. So yes, you won't return to a ready position after every cast blow, but at some point it will happen, and that's just something you sort of need to be aware of. He also talks about, losing your weapon, which is a concern I brought up originally as well. He was saying that, if you do the cast blow, you can just do it over and over again, and you're not going to drop your weapon. And I agree, you won't drop your weapon on your own. The problem is dropping your weapon with a parry, or especially if someone just slams on it with a shield. Now this shield is admittedly a little bigger compared to the ones he has, but it fits relatively well in the timeline of just Celtic peoples in general. It's 3 foot tall, 2 feet across, oval shield. So this works really well for, most Iron Age peoples will use something like this. And his channel does specifically Celtic stuff, so I imagine this is a decent representation of something that he would come into contact with as doing Celtic martial arts. So if you do the cast blow, yes, there's just a short time where you have this weaker grip, where it's almost like a loose handshake. See if I can get that in frame a little. There we go. You have this looser grip that you don't receive if you're doing a normal strike, a non-cast blow. So if you're at that position, it'll be very easy for someone to just slam with the shield, or else just do a strong parry. And if it's timed right, you have a much better chance of being able to do disarm that way. Because when he talks about disarms, he mentioned, somebody grabbing your wrist, doing sort of a more classic disarm, and that's not exactly what I had in mind when I was talking about being disarmed through this technique. It wouldn't be somebody doing a more classic disarm where you grab the wrist or wrestle the weapon out of the hand. It would be, if you can time it right, in that moment of weakness, just slam down with your shield rim or with your weapon. I imagine it would be easy, or at least easier than a normal blow, easier enough that I would be a little bit concerned to knock the weapon out of the hand that way. Again, not through a conventional grapple or means like that, but by just slamming onto the weapon, especially if you can hit towards the end where you just have a little better leverage. And if you have like a heavier shield or a more front-heavy weapon, like the Irish expanded end swords, but those were unique to Ireland, I believe, and not in the rest of Celtic Europe. So if you have either, just a heavy weapon or a heavy shield, and you could time it right, which is admittedly a little tricky, depending on how familiar you are with fighting against this technique. But with good timing, I imagine it could be quite easy to do a disarm that way, by knocking the weapon out of the hand, not by wrestling it out of the person's hand. My final point is about predictability. It talks about using the cast blow really well as it's unpredictable, that, in the middle of fighting you can throw in this cast blow, and since it's, relatively, it's not as common a technique, then that it'll gain the advantage by being surprised. And I don't really buy that. I mean, yes, it's an interesting thing to do with techniques, but you can do that with just about any other technique that's rare. So, Celtic swords, some of them have very rounded ends, so it'll be definitely a very primarily slashing weapon with very little thrusting capabilities. So you could argue that if you had a more tapered end, a more, thrust-worthy sword, that then a thrust would be at least as surprising as a cast blow. Likewise, if you have, a rapier or a more thrust-central type of weapon, then doing a slashing attack would be just as surprising on its own without having to do a cast blow. Or, just using shield strikes, as a larger part of your arsenal, using your shield much more aggressively than perhaps would be expected. But using it primarily as a weapon rather than a defensive technique would be just as surprising. So while yes, the cast blow does have its benefits of using it as a more unknown, more surprising technique, you can see that about almost any technique that's outside of what your fighting style is, and not unique to the cast blow. So while yes, it's true what he says, I don't think it's quite as beneficial as it would sound when it's so much relatively easy to get to that same ends without doing a cast blow, by just doing a thrust or a shield strike or a punch or a kick or just anything they aren't expecting that's not quite as drastic as the cast blow. Yes, other than that, I think he actually did some really good points. And again, he has a very small channel, but it's also very good, and you all should definitely check it out. Thanks for watching.